A 9-year-old princess stands frozen in the marble corridor of Kensington Palace. Her small hands clutch a worn teddy bear as armed guards rush past her. One officer stops, his hand moving to his weapon as he speaks urgently into his radio. The child's eyes widen when she hears the words that will change everything. "We have a breach. All royals must be accounted for immediately, within seconds." Princess Charlotte finds herself at the center of a security crisis that will test the very foundations of royal protection. What happened in the next 4 hours would never be forgotten by anyone present that day. This is the true story of how a routine morning turned into one of the most intense security operations in modern royal history. The morning of October 12th began like any other Tuesday at Kensington Palace. The autumn sun cast long shadows across the perfectly maintained gardens as staff members moved through their daily routines. Princess Charlotte had woken early that morning, excited about the art class scheduled for later that day. She'd been working on a special painting for her grandmother's birthday. And today, she would add the finishing touches. Officer James Mitchell had been assigned to the morning shift at the palace. A veteran of royal protection with 15 years of experience, he had seen countless routine days pass without incident. He stood at his post near the West Wing entrance, his trained eyes scanning the grounds as they had done thousands of times before. The morning briefing had been standard. No special events were scheduled. The royal family members present were accounted for. It seemed like another peaceful day in the life of palace security. Charlotte had finished her breakfast of toast with strawberry jam and was heading to the art room with her nanny, Maria Santos. Maria had been with the family for 3 years and adored the young princess. They walked through the long corridor lined with portraits of previous royal family members, their footsteps echoing softly on the polished floors. Charlotte was chattering excitedly about her painting, describing in detail the colors she planned to use. At precisely 9:15 in the morning, everything changed. Officer Mitchell's radio crackled to life with an urgency he had rarely heard in his long career. The voice of Commander Richard Thompson, head of palace security, cut through the static with words that made Mitchell's blood run cold. An unauthorized individual had been detected on the palace grounds. The security breach had occurred near the East Gardens, dangerously close to the residential areas, where the royal family lived and worked. Mitchell's training kicked in immediately. His hand moved instinctively to his weapon as he began the established security protocol. All entrances would be sealed. All royal family members needed to be located and secured. Every staff member would be accounted for. The palace, usually a place of calm dignity, is about to transform into a fortress under lockdown. Commander Thompson was already coordinating from the Central Security Office. His team was reviewing camera footage, trying to determine how many individuals might be involved and what their intentions could be. The unauthorized person had been spotted by a groundskeeper near the Rose Garden. Initial reports suggested it was a single male, possibly in his 30s, wearing dark clothing. He had somehow bypassed the outer security perimeter, which should have been impossible. Throughout the palace, security officers sprang into action. Doors were being locked. Windows were being secured. The protection team assigned to other royal family members was moving their charges to designated safe rooms. The protocols that had been practiced countless times were now being executed with precision and speed. Maria noticed the sudden change in atmosphere before Charlotte did. She saw 2 security officers rushing past them in the corridor, their expressions tense and focused. Her instinct told her something was wrong. She gently took Charlotte's hand and suggested they return to the princess's private quarters. Charlotte protested at first, wanting to continue to the art room, but Maria's firm tone made it clear this was not negotiable. As they turned to head back, Officer Mitchell appeared at the end of the corridor. His professional demeanor was intact, but Maria could see the concern in his eyes. He approached them quickly, speaking in a calm but authoritative voice. The palace was implementing enhanced security measures. All residents needed to proceed immediately to secure locations. He would escort them personally. Charlotte sensed the seriousness of the situation. The happy chatter about her paintings stopped. She clutched her favorite teddy bear, Mr. Buttons, which she had been carrying with her. The bear had been a gift from her great-grandmother and went everywhere with Charlotte during her private time at home. Now, holding it tightly, she felt both scared and curious about what was happening. Officer Mitchell led them down a different corridor than the one they had intended to take. This route would bring them to a secure area more quickly. As they walked, more security personnel passed them, all moving with urgent purpose. Mitchell spoke into his radio, reporting their location and destination. The response came back quickly, confirming their route and asking for updates every 30 seconds. The princess asked what was happening. Officer Mitchell, trained to balance honesty with reassurance when dealing with the young royals, explained that the security team was conducting an important safety check. Sometimes, he told her, they needed to make sure everything in the palace was exactly as it should be. Charlotte accepted this explanation. Though her grip on Mr. Buttons tightened, Commander Thompson's voice came through Mitchell's earpiece again. The situation was developing rapidly. Additional unauthorized movement had been detected, this time near the north wing. The possibility of multiple intruders was now being considered. Thompson ordered a full sweep of the entire palace complex. Every room would be checked. Every closet, every alcove, every possible hiding place would be searched. More armed officers were being deployed throughout the building. The Metropolitan Police had been notified, and additional units were en route to support the palace security team. A helicopter was being scrambled to provide aerial surveillance of the grounds and surrounding area. The quiet Tuesday morning had erupted into a full-scale security emergency. Mitchell, Maria, and Charlotte reached the secure wing of the palace. This area had been specially designed with reinforced doors and advanced security systems. Other staff members were already being gathered there, their faces showing various degrees of concern and confusion. Charlotte recognized some of them, including one of the kitchen staff who always saved extra cookies for her. As they entered the secure area, Mitchell received another urgent message. Commander Thompson needed a complete head count of all royal family members immediately. The breach had escalated to a level that required absolute certainty about everyone's location and safety. Mitchell confirmed that Princess Charlotte was secure, but his expression showed the gravity of what was unfolding. The young princess stood in the secure room, surrounded by familiar faces but feeling the unfamiliar tension that filled the air. She didn't fully understand what a security breach meant, but she understood that the adults around her were worried. Maria stayed close to her, offering quiet reassurance while remaining alert to any instructions from the security team. Outside the secure wing, dozens of officers were conducting their systematic search of the palace. Dogs trained in detection were being brought in. Technology was being deployed to scan for any electronic devices or communications that shouldn't be present. Every second counted in a situation like this. The longer the breach remained unresolved, the greater the potential danger Commander Thompson was coordinating with Scotland Yard and MI5. The possibility that this could be an organized attack rather than a lone intruder was being seriously considered. Intelligence agencies were being consulted. Previous threat assessments were being reviewed. Every piece of information, no matter how small, was being analyzed to understand what they were dealing with. Mitchell stood guard at the entrance to the secure wing, his weapon now visible and ready. He had protected members of the royal family for years, but the weight of responsibility had never felt heavier than it did at this moment. Behind that door was a 9-year-old child who depended on him and his colleagues to keep her safe. Failure was not an option he would even consider. The search teams were moving methodically through the palace. Room by room, floor by floor, they checked every space. Communication between team members was constant and precise. Any anomaly, any object out of place, anything that seemed even slightly wrong was being reported and investigated. Charlotte sat in a comfortable chair in the secure room. Still holding Mr. Buttons, Maria had found some books to keep her occupied, trying to maintain a sense of normalcy despite the extraordinary circumstances. Other staff members spoke in hushed tones, speculation and worry evident in their conversations. The princess tried to focus on her book, but her attention kept drifting to the adults and their concerned faces. Time seemed to move differently during the lockdown. Minutes felt like hours. The usual sounds of the palace, the footsteps in corridors, the distant voices. The general hum of daily activity had been replaced by an eerie silence broken only by the occasional rapid movement of security teams. Everyone waited, uncertain of when or how this situation would be resolved. Commander Thompson stood in the central security office, his eyes fixed on multiple screens showing camera feeds from every corner of the palace grounds. His team had been searching for 40 minutes, and the pressure was mounting with every passing second. The initial breach near the East Gardens had been confirmed, but the intruder's current location remained unknown. What troubled Thompson most was the second detection near the North Wing. Were they dealing with two separate individuals? Or had one person moved with remarkable speed through areas that should have been impossible to access? The Metropolitan Police had arrived in force, their vehicles discreetly positioned around the palace perimeter to avoid public attention. Detective Inspector Sarah Chen was liaising with Thompson, bringing additional resources and expertise to the operation. She had dealt with high-profile security situations before, but a breach at a royal residence carried its own unique pressures and protocols. The media had not yet caught wind of the situation. Everyone hoped it could be resolved before that changed. Inside the secure wing, Princess Charlotte had grown quieter. The initial confusion had given way to a dawning understanding that something serious was happening. She watched Officer Mitchell standing at the door, his posture alert and ready. Maria stayed close, occasionally stroking Charlotte's hair in a comforting gesture. The other staff members had settled into nervous silence, occasionally whispering to each other, but mostly just waiting. The search teams had covered the ground floor and were moving methodically to the upper levels. Each team consisted of 3 officers, moving in coordinated patterns that left no space unchecked. They cleared the library, finding nothing but centuries-old books and historical artifacts. The staterooms, usually prepared for official functions, stood empty and undisturbed. The private dining areas, the music room, the various sitting rooms all showed no signs of intrusion. In the security office, a young analyst named David Preston was reviewing the camera footage frame by frame. He had been with the Palace Security Technology team for 2 years, and his attention to detail had proven valuable many times. Now, he was looking for anything that might explain how someone had breached their defenses. The exterior cameras showed nothing unusual in the hours leading up to the breach. Staff had arrived at their regular times. Deliveries had been made through proper channels. Everything had appeared normal. Then Preston noticed something. He rewound the footage from the East Gardens camera and watched it again more slowly. There for just 3 frames, a shadow moved in a way that didn't match the morning sun's angle. It was subtle, easy to miss during real-time monitoring, but it was there. He called Commander Thompson over immediately. Thompson studied the footage, his experienced eye confirming what Preston had spotted. Someone had indeed been there, and they had been careful to stay in blind spots as much as possible. But how had they known where the blind spots were? That information was classified and constantly updated. Only authorized security personnel had access to the complete surveillance layout. Thompson felt a cold realization settling in. This wasn't a random intrusion. Whoever was on the palace grounds had inside knowledge of their security systems. Detective. Inspector Chen reached the same conclusion when Thompson shared the footage with her. They needed to consider the possibility of an inside threat. That meant everyone on the palace staff, everyone with access to security information, had to be considered a potential suspect or accomplice. It was a disturbing thought, but one they couldn't ignore. Charlotte asked Maria if she could have some water. Maria looked to Officer Mitchell, who nodded and spoke into his radio to request bottled water to be brought to the secure wing. Even such a simple request required security clearance during a lockdown. A few minutes later, another officer arrived with water bottles, which were inspected before being distributed to those in the secure room. The princess sipped her water slowly, her mind processing everything she was observing. Despite her young age, Charlotte was remarkably perceptive. She understood that the adults were protecting her, that something dangerous might be happening outside the secure room. She thought about her brothers and parents, wondering if they were safe too. Maria sensed her worry and quietly assured her that security teams were protecting all members of the family. On the upper floors, The search teams had reached the residential corridors. These were the most private areas of the palace, where royal family members lived their personal lives away from public view. Officer Jennifer Walsh led her team through these spaces with particular care. The responsibility of searching the princess's bedroom, her private study, her playroom, felt especially significant given that Charlotte herself was currently in lockdown because of this breach. Walsh and her colleagues checked every wardrobe, every bathroom, under every bed, behind every curtain. The princess's room was decorated with the artwork she had created, family photographs, and her collection of books. It looked like any child's room might look, except for the priceless antiques in the view of the palace gardens through bulletproof windows. Everything appeared undisturbed. The team moved on to the next area. Commander Thompson received a report from the exterior sweep teams. They had found evidence of entry near a service gate that was used for garden maintenance. The lock had been picked, professionally by the looks of it, and there were faint footprints in the soft earth nearby. The intruder had come prepared with knowledge and tools. This was looking less like a random breach and more like a planned infiltration. The question that haunted Thompson was simple but critical. What was the objective? If this was an attack, why hadn't it been carried out yet? If it was reconnaissance, what were they looking for? If it was an attempt to access classified information, which areas would be most vulnerable? Every answer led to more questions and more concerns. Detective Inspector Chen was coordinating with MI5 to review recent intelligence reports. Had there been any chatter about potential threats to the royal family? Any suspicious activities that might connect to today's breach? The intelligence community was pulling every file, every intercept, every bit of information that might be relevant. Inside the secure wing, an hour had now passed since the lockdown began. Charlotte had finished her water and was trying to read her book again. The waiting was the hardest part. Not knowing what was happening, not understanding when things would return to normal, created an anxiety that even the calm presence of Maria and Officer Mitchell couldn't completely dispel. Mitchell's radio suddenly came alive with urgent voices. A search team had found something in the north wing. An office that should have been empty showed signs of recent entry. Papers on a desk had been disturbed. A computer that should have been in sleep mode was active. Someone had been there, and recently. The team was securing the area and calling for forensic specialists. Thompson immediately dispatched his best analysts to the North Wing office. Every surface would be checked for fingerprints. Any digital activity would be traced. Security camera footage of that specific area would be reviewed minute by minute. This was the first concrete evidence of what the intruder had been doing inside the palace. The office belonged to a mid-level administrative assistant who handled scheduling and correspondence for various palace functions. It wasn't a high-security area, but it contained information about royal family movements, upcoming events, and access protocols. In the wrong hands, that information could be dangerous. Officer Walsh and her team had completed their search of the residential floors. Nothing had been found in those areas, which was a relief, but also confusing. If the intruder had made it as far as the North Wing office, why hadn't they attempted to access more sensitive areas? What specifically were they after? Charlotte shifted in her chair, trying to get comfortable. Mr. Buttons had been set aside on a nearby table, and she reached for him again. The familiar softness of the worn teddy bear provided comfort in the uncertain situation. Maria smiled at her encouragingly. Though her own worry was barely concealed behind her professional demeanor, Thompson was studying the layout of the North Wing on a digital map. The office that had been compromised was positioned in a way that could provide access to several other areas if someone knew the building's layout. There were utility corridors, service passages, spaces between walls that dated back to the palace's original construction. An intruder with detailed knowledge could potentially move through the building without being detected by cameras in the main corridors. He ordered teams to begin checking these hidden passages. Officers equipped with thermal imaging devices would sweep the utility areas. Nothing would be left unexplored. The palace was vast, with centuries of modifications and additions creating a complex maze of rooms and passages. It was both a historical treasure and a security nightmare. Detective Inspector Chen received a call from MI5. There had been increased online chatter in certain forums over the past week about palace security. Nothing specific enough to warrant a warning, but in light of today's breach, it took on new significance. Analysts were now prioritizing the review of those communications to see if they could identify who might be behind the intrusion. The forensic team in the North Wing office was finding traces of someone's presence. A partial fingerprint on the keyboard. Fibers from clothing that didn't match the usual staff uniforms. Most importantly, they discovered that files had been accessed on the computer. The intruder had been looking through schedules and event plans. They had been searching for something specific. Mitchell received an update through his earpiece, and his expression darkened. Charlotte noticed the change and felt a fresh wave of anxiety. She wanted to ask what was wrong, but something in Mitchell's face told her this wasn't the time for questions. She held Mr. Buttons tighter and looked to Maria, who reached over and held her hand. The search of the utility passages had begun. Officers moved through narrow corridors that most palace residents didn't even know existed. Dust and cobwebs indicated these areas were rarely accessed. Their flashlights cut through the darkness as they checked every corner, every junction, every possible hiding place. The thermal imaging revealed the heat signatures of pipes and electrical systems, but so far, no human presence. Commander Thompson was running multiple scenarios through his mind. If the intruder was still in the building, they were exceptionally well hidden or had access to information that let them stay ahead of the search teams. If they had already left, when and how had they done so without being detected? The exterior teams had been in place within minutes of the initial breach. The window for escape had been very small, 2 hours into the lockdown. The situation had evolved from a straightforward security breach to a complex investigation. Commander Thompson had assembled his senior team in the security office to reassess their approach. Detective Inspector Chen stood beside him, reviewing the evidence they had gathered so far. The partial fingerprint from the North Wing office was being run through multiple databases. The digital forensics team was tracing exactly which files had been accessed on the compromised computer. Every piece of information was being analyzed for clues about the intruder's identity and intentions. Officer. Though his shift should have ended an hour ago. There was no question of leaving during a crisis like this. His relief officer had been redirected to join the search teams, and Mitchell was glad to stay where he was. Protecting Princess Charlotte felt like the most important job he had ever had. He thought about his own daughter, who was about Charlotte's age, and felt an even deeper commitment to keeping the young princess safe. Inside the secure room, Charlotte had grown restless. The book she had been trying to read lay forgotten on her lap. She had counted the ceiling tiles twice, studied the patterns in the carpet, and memorized the faces of all the staff members sharing the space with her. Maria had tried to engage her in quiet conversation, but even that had lost its appeal. The princess wanted to know when she could leave, when things would be normal again, when she could finish her painting for her grandmother. The forensic analysis of the North Wing office was revealing troubling details. The files that had been accessed contained schedules for the upcoming month, including private family events that weren't public knowledge. Someone had been specifically looking for information about when and where members of the royal family would be during their personal time. The implications were deeply concerning to everyone analyzing the data. Detective Inspector Chen was coordinating with cybersecurity experts to determine if any information had been transmitted from the compromised computer. Had the intruder sent files to an outside location? Had they uploaded data to a cloud service? The technical investigation was running parallel to the physical search. Both equally critical to understanding the full scope of the breach, Officer Jennifer Walsh had moved her search team to the basement levels of the palace. These areas housed mechanical systems, storage rooms, and various service facilities that kept the historic building functioning. The spaces were dimly lit and filled with decades of accumulated supplies and equipment. It was slow going, checking behind old furniture. Inside storage closets, through maintenance tunnels that connected different parts of the complex. In one storage room filled with decorations from past state dinners, Walsh noticed something that made her pause. A stack of boxes had been moved recently. The dust patterns on the floor showed where they had been. The boxes themselves had clean spots where hands had gripped them. She called for her team members to join her. Together, they carefully moved the boxes aside, revealing a door that hadn't appeared on any of the floor plans they had been given. "Commander?" Thompson received Walsh's report with a mixture of vindication and concern. He had suspected there were spaces in the palace that weren't properly documented. Buildings this old, with centuries of modifications, often held surprises. But a door that wasn't on the official plans represented a significant security vulnerability. He authorized Walsh to proceed with extreme caution and dispatched. Back up to her location, Walsh and her team approached the door carefully. It was old, the wood dark with age, but the lock was modern. Someone had installed new hardware on this ancient door, relatively recently based on the condition of the screws and metal. Walsh tried the handle. It was locked. She radioed for the specialized team that carried tools for breaching secured entrances. Within minutes, they arrived and began working on the lock. Charlotte asked Maria what time it was. When told it was nearly noon, the princess remarked that she should be at her art class by now. Her voice carried a hint of sadness that made Maria's heart ache. This should have been a day of creativity and fun for the child. Instead, she was locked in a secure room, surrounded by worried adults. While armed officers searched for an intruder who had violated the safety of her home, the specialized team had the old door unlocked. Officer Walsh drew her weapon and nodded to her colleagues. They opened the door slowly, their flashlights illuminating a narrow staircase that descended into darkness. The air that came from the opening was stale and cold. Walsh spoke into her radio, describing what they had found and requesting additional support before proceeding down the stairs. Thompson dispatched 3 more officers to join Walsh's team. He also contacted Detective Inspector Chen, who immediately made her way to the basement level. This hidden staircase could be nothing, a forgotten remnant of the palace's long history, or it could be exactly where their intruder had gone to hide. Either way, it needed to be thoroughly investigated. As the reinforced team prepared to descend the hidden staircase, the fingerprint analysis came back with results. The partial print found in the North Wing office matched someone in the database. Not a criminal record, but an employment record. The print belonged to someone who had worked at the palace 3 years ago as part of a renovation crew. His name was Marcus Brennan, and according to the records, he had been cleared by security screening at the time of his employment. Thompson immediately ordered a full background check on Brennan. Where was he now? What had he been doing since leaving his position with the renovation company? Were there any red flags in his history that had been missed during the original screening? The cyber team was also tasked with searching for any digital footprint, social media presence, or online activity that might give clues about his current motivations. Officer Walsh led her team down the hidden staircase. The steps were stone, worn smooth by centuries of use. The walls were damp and their flashlights revealed passages that branched in multiple directions at the bottom. This wasn't just a room or a small space. It was an extensive network of tunnels that must have been built when the palace was first constructed, possibly as escape routes or secret passages for use during times of conflict. The discovery of these tunnels changed everything about the search operation. If the intruder knew about this network, he could have been moving through the palace completely undetected by the security cameras. He might still be down here, hiding in the darkness, or he could have used these passages to exit the building entirely. Thompson ordered teams to seal all basement access points, while Walsh's team explored the tunnel system. Charlotte had fallen quiet, her earlier restlessness giving way to a kind of resigned patience. She sat with her hands folded in her lap, Mr. Buttons tucked under one arm. She had heard some of the adults whispering about tunnels being discovered, though they tried to keep their voices too low for her to understand. The princess was intelligent enough to know that the situation had become more complicated, not less. Detective Inspector Chen had reached the basement and joined the team at the entrance to the hidden staircase. She descended carefully, her own flashlight adding to the illumination. At the bottom, she stood with Walsh and surveyed the tunnel network. The passages extended beyond what their lights could reach. This was going to require a systematic and thorough search that could take hours. The background check on Marcus Brennan was producing troubling information. After leaving the renovation company, he had worked briefly for a private security firm. Then his employment history became spotty and unclear. He had been active on several online forums discussing palace history and architecture, showing particular interest in the building's hidden spaces and secret passages. 6 months ago, his online activity had stopped entirely. Thompson shared this information with Chen through secure communication. They both understood what it likely meant. Brennan had spent months researching the palace, probably using knowledge gained during his legitimate work there years ago. Then he had gone dark, planning whatever he intended to do without leaving a digital trail. Today's breach wasn't random or opportunistic. It was carefully planned by someone who knew the building intimately. In the tunnels, Walsh's team had split into 2 groups to cover more ground efficiently. They moved slowly and carefully, checking every alcove, every side passage, every space where someone could hide. The stone walls were covered in centuries of moisture and grime. In some places, they found old torches still mounted in brackets, relics from a time when these passages were regularly used. One team found footprints in the dust, fresh prints that could only have been made recently. They followed the trail deeper into the tunnel network, their weapons ready and their senses alert. The prints led them to a junction where 3 passages met. There, they found evidence that someone had spent time in this location. A bottle of water still half full, a flashlight, battery dead, and most significantly, a backpack containing tools and electronic devices. Walsh immediately secured the area and called for forensics. The backpack and its contents would need to be carefully examined for evidence. The tools included various items useful for bypassing locks and security systems. The electronic devices would be analyzed to see what information they contained, whether they had been used to communicate with anyone outside the palace. Commander Thompson received the news about the backpack with grim satisfaction. They had found concrete evidence of the intruder's presence and activities. But the critical question remained unanswered. Where was Marcus Brennan now? Was he still somewhere in these tunnels, or had he already escaped? And what had he accomplished during his time inside the palace? The cyber team had accessed the electronic devices found in the backpack remotely. One was a laptop with detailed floor plans of the palace, including areas that weren't available to the public or even to most staff. Another was a phone that showed text messages discussing security protocols and shift changes. Brennan hadn't been working alone. Someone had been feeding him information, helping him plan this breach. Detective Inspector Chen ordered an immediate security review of all current palace staff. Everyone with access to sensitive information needed to be questioned. Phone records would be subpoenaed. Digital communications would be examined. Whoever had been helping Brennan from the inside needed to be identified before they could cause more damage or help with another breach attempt. Charlotte heard Officer Mitchell speaking urgently into his radio. She couldn't make out the words, but his tone had changed. Something important was happening. Maria noticed the princess's attention and tried to redirect it, suggesting they play a word game to pass the time. Charlotte agreed half-heartedly, but her mind was clearly elsewhere. In the tunnel network, the search teams had traced the footprints to a ladder that led upward to a grate in the palace gardens. The grate had been opened from below and not fully secured when it was closed again. This was how Brennan had escaped. While security teams had been locking down the building and searching every room, he had been moving through the hidden tunnels and exiting through a route that hadn't been monitored because no one knew it existed. Thompson immediately ordered teams to review all exterior camera footage from the past 2 hours, focusing on the garden areas. They needed to see when Brennan had emerged and where he had gone. The Metropolitan Police were notified to begin searching the surrounding area. Every officer received Brennan's description and photograph from his employment records. An alert was issued to airports, train stations, and border crossings. The cyber team had found something else on the laptop. Files containing photographs taken inside the palace, including some from the residential areas. Brennan had been documenting his route, possibly for his own reference, or perhaps to share with others. But one photograph in particular caught Thompson's attention. It showed Princess Charlotte's playroom, taken through a window from the gardens. The date stamp indicated it had been taken 3 weeks ago, during an evening when the princess had been in that room. The realization that Brennan had been surveilling the young princess specifically made Thompson's blood run cold. This wasn't just about accessing schedules or stealing information. Brennan had been focused on Charlotte, photographing her location and movements. The security implications were severe and immediate. Thompson ordered enhanced protection protocols for all royal family members, with special emphasis on the children. The discovery that Marcus Brennan had been specifically monitoring Princess Charlotte transformed the investigation into something far more urgent and personal. Commander Thompson immediately contacted the highest levels of royal security and law enforcement. This was no longer just a security breach. It was a potential threat to a child's safety, required the full resources of multiple agencies to address. Detective Inspector Chen was coordinating with MI5 and Scotland Yard to create a comprehensive search operation for Brennan. His photograph was being distributed to every law enforcement agency in the country. Border security was on high alert. His known associates were being identified and located for questioning. Every tool and resource available was being mobilized to find him before he could pose any further danger in the secure wing. Officer Mitchell had received updated instructions. The lockdown would continue until Brennan was located and apprehended. Princess Charlotte would remain under the highest level of protection. Her parents had been notified of the specific nature of the threat, and arrangements were being made for additional security measures once the lockdown was lifted. Charlotte noticed the change in Mitchell's demeanor. He had moved closer to the door, his posture even more alert than before. She didn't understand all the details, but she knew the situation had become more serious. Maria stayed beside her, maintaining a calm exterior while internally processing the frightening reality that someone had been watching the princess. Planning something that remained unclear but was certainly dangerous. The forensic team had completed their initial analysis of the Bounty's backpack and its contents. In addition to the tools and electronic devices, they found a notebook with handwritten entries. Brennan had been meticulously planning his breach for months. The notes detailed security shift changes, camera blind spots, and the locations of various family members at different times of day. Most disturbing were the pages focused entirely on Charlotte, her routine, her activities, and the times when she was most vulnerable. Thompson shared this information with Detective Inspector Chen in a private communication. They both understood the implications. Brennan's breach today might have been reconnaissance for a future attempt, or it could have been intended as an actual abduction that was interrupted when security detected his presence sooner than he had anticipated. Either way, the princess had been in real danger, and the security measures that protected her had potentially prevented a tragedy. The cyber team had successfully traced the text messages on Brennan's phone. The person who had been feeding him information worked in the palace administrative offices. Her name was Jennifer Cole, a staff member who had been employed for just over a year. She had access to schedules and routine information, exactly the kind of details that appeared in Brennan's notes. Officers were immediately dispatched to locate and detain her for questioning. Jennifer Cole was found at her desk in the administrative wing, apparently working normally despite the lockdown. When officers approached her, she showed no signs of alarm or guilt. She appeared genuinely confused when they asked her to accompany them for questioning. In the interview room, Detective Inspector Chen and Commander Thompson confronted her with the evidence from Brennan's phone. Cole's reaction was one of shock and denial. She admitted to knowing Marcus Brennan. They had dated briefly over a year ago, but insisted she had broken off contact with him 6 months prior. When shown the text messages, her face went pale. Someone had been using her phone to communicate with Brennan, sending information she had never consciously shared. The technical team quickly confirmed that her phone had been compromised with sophisticated spyware. Brennan had installed it during their relationship, allowing him to access her messages, emails, and any information on her device. This revelation cleared Cole of intentional involvement, but opened new questions about Brennan's capabilities and planning. He had used a relationship to gain access to Palace's information through someone who had legitimate clearance. The spyware had remained undetected for months, feeding him a steady stream of intelligence that he used to plan his breach. While this investigation was unfolding, the exterior camera footage had been reviewed. Brennan was captured on video emerging from the garden grate at approximately 10:30, an hour after the initial breach was detected. He had calmly walked across the gardens to a service entrance in the outer wall, using a key that he must have made during his previous legitimate employment. He had then disappeared into the streets of London. Metropolitan police units were now conducting a massive search. Brennan's last known address was being raided, though initial reports indicated he hadn't been there for weeks. His family members were being contacted and interviewed. Friends and former colleagues were being asked about any contact they might have had with him recently. Every lead was being pursued with urgency. In the tunnel network beneath the palace, engineers and security specialists were conducting a complete survey. They needed to understand the full extent of these passages, map every entrance and exit, and implement new security measures to ensure they could never again be used for unauthorized access. The discovery had exposed a significant vulnerability in the palace's defenses, one that had existed for centuries, but was now being addressed with modern technology and security protocols. Princess Charlotte had been in the secure wing for over 3 hours. She was tired, hungry, and increasingly anxious about what was happening. Maria had managed to have lunch brought to the secure area, and Charlotte picked at her food without much appetite. The normalcy of a meal felt strange against the backdrop of the ongoing crisis. She wanted to ask questions, but could sense that the adults were too focused on other matters to give her detailed answers. Officer Mitchell received word that additional protection officers were being assigned to Princess Charlotte, effective immediately. Even after the lockdown was lifted, she would have enhanced security for the foreseeable future. Her routines would need to be adjusted. Her movements would be more carefully controlled. The freedom that a 9-year-old princess could normally enjoy would be significantly restricted until the threat was fully resolved. At 4 in the afternoon, a break in the case came from an unexpected source. A clerk at a bus station in Dover reported seeing someone matching Brennan's description, purchasing a ticket to France. The clerk had noticed him because he seemed nervous and had paid cash for the ticket, unusual for international travel. Metropolitan Police immediately contacted French authorities. The ferry hadn't departed yet. If they moved quickly, they could intercept Brennan before he left British soil. Police units converged on the Dover terminal. They located Brennan in the waiting area, sitting with a small bag, trying to blend in with other travelers. When approached by officers, he initially attempted to flee, but was quickly apprehended. He was taken into custody without incident, though the look on his face showed he knew his plan had fallen apart. Commander Thompson received confirmation of the arrest with profound relief. The immediate threat had been neutralized. Brennan was in custody and would face serious charges for his breach of palace security and the surveillance of a minor royal family member. The investigation would continue to fully understand his motives and determine if anyone else had been involved in his planning. Detective Inspector Chen personally conducted the initial interrogation of Brennan. He refused to speak without a lawyer present, which was his right, but his silence spoke volumes. The evidence against him was overwhelming. The tools, the electronics, the notebook with his handwritten plans, the spyware on Jennifer Cole's phone, and now the attempted flight to France, all painted a clear picture of premeditated criminal activity. In the secure wing, Officer Mitchell received the news that the suspect had been apprehended. He allowed himself a small smile of satisfaction before turning to inform Maria and the princess. Charlotte looked up hopefully when she saw Mitchell's expression change. He told her that the security situation had been resolved and that they would be able to leave the secure area shortly, though some additional precautions would remain in place. The relief in the room was palpable. Staff members who had been tense and worried for hours visibly relaxed. Maria hugged Charlotte, telling her how brave she had been. The princess, who had held herself together remarkably well throughout the ordeal, suddenly felt tears welling up. The stress of the day, the fear she had been suppressing, the strangeness of being locked away from her normal life, all came flooding out. Maria comforted her as she cried, understanding that sometimes children need to release emotions they've been holding back. Officer Mitchell stood respectfully apart, giving them space but remaining ready to escort them safely back to the residential areas when they were ready. Other staff members quietly gathered their belongings, preparing to return to their duties or head home for the day, depending on their assignments. Commander Thompson was conducting a comprehensive review of everything that had happened. The breach had exposed serious vulnerabilities in palace security. The hidden tunnel network needed to be secured. Background check procedures needed to be enhanced to catch potential threats like Brennan earlier. Technology security needed improvement to prevent spyware compromises. There would be extensive reports to write and recommendations to make. The palace would need time to fully recover from this incident. Trust had been shaken. The sense of safety that everyone who lived and worked there had taken for granted had been violated. But Thompson also recognized that the security systems had ultimately worked. The breach was detected quickly. Protocols were executed efficiently. And most importantly, Princess Charlotte and all other palace residents had been kept safe throughout the crisis. As evening approached, Princess Charlotte was finally able to leave the secure wing. Officer Mitchell and 2 additional protection officers escorted her and Maria back to the residential areas. The palace corridors that had been filled with armed guards conducting searches were now quiet and calm again. Staff members went about their duties with a new awareness of the security that protected them. Charlotte asked if she could still work on her grandmother's birthday painting. Maria checked with the security team, who confirmed that the art room had been thoroughly searched and secured. They proceeded there under escort, and Charlotte settled at her easel with visible relief. Holding a paintbrush and mixing colors felt wonderfully normal after the extraordinary day she had experienced. Officer Mitchell stood watch outside the art room. His shift now extended into the evening to provide continuity of protection for the princess. He thought about how close they had come to something potentially terrible happening. Brennan's intentions were still being investigated, but the surveillance he had conducted suggested planning for abduction or worse. The fact that he had been stopped before carrying out whatever he intended was a testament to the vigilance of the security team. Detective Inspector Chen was compiling her report on the incident for the senior leadership at Scotland Yard and MI5. The case would proceed through the criminal justice system. With Brennan facing multiple charges, the investigation would continue to explore whether he had accomplices beyond the unwitting Jennifer Cole, his computer. Equipment would be forensically analyzed for any connections to organized crime or other threat actors. In the days that followed, Princess Charlotte's life gradually returned to a new normal. The enhanced security became routine. She grew accustomed to having additional protection officers nearby. Her schedules were varied more to prevent predictable patterns. Some activities were restricted or relocated to more secure areas. But her parents and the palace staff worked hard to ensure that she could still be a child, still play and learn and grow despite the increased precautions. The hidden tunnel network beneath the palace was thoroughly mapped and secured. New sensors and surveillance equipment were installed. Access points were sealed or monitored with advanced security systems. The vulnerability that had existed for centuries was finally addressed with 21st century technology. Marcus Brennan eventually provided some information about his motives during court proceedings. He claimed to have developed an obsession with the royal family during his legitimate work at the palace. The surveillance of Princess Charlotte had been his way of feeling connected to the world he had briefly accessed. His plans, according to prosecutors, had been evolving toward an abduction attempt that would have brought him the attention and notoriety he craved. He was sentenced to a lengthy prison term for his crimes, including breaking and entering, unlawful surveillance of a minor, possession of implements for criminal use, and attempted kidnapping. The sentence sent a clear message about the seriousness with which threats to the royal family were treated. Officer Mitchell continued his career in royal protection, eventually receiving a commendation for his role in keeping Princess Charlotte safe during the crisis. He never spoke publicly about the details of that day, but those who worked with him knew he took particular pride in having been there when a child needed protection. Princess Charlotte completed her grandmother's birthday painting. It depicted a beautiful garden scene with flowers in full bloom and butterflies dancing among them. When she presented it to her grandmother weeks later at a small family gathering, she didn't mention the day she had been unable to work on it because of a security lockdown. Some experiences, even frightening ones, became private memories that shaped who she would become but didn't define her in the moment. The incident became a classified case study in royal security used to train future protection officers and security personnel. The lessons learned about vulnerability assessment, threat detection, crisis response were incorporated into updated protocols and procedures. The palace became more secure because of what had been revealed on that October morning. For everyone involved, The day remained a reminder of how quickly normalcy could be shattered, and how important vigilance and preparation were in protecting those who needed it most. Princess Charlotte had experienced fear and uncertainty, but she had also witnessed the dedication of people like Officer Mitchell, Commander Thompson, Detective Inspector Chen, and many others who worked tirelessly to keep her safe. As time passed and Charlotte grew older, she would occasionally remember that day when she sat in a secure room, holding Mr. Buttons, waiting to return to her normal life. She would remember the adults who surrounded her with protection and care, and she would carry with her an understanding of both the privileges and the vulnerabilities that came with being born into a family that lived their lives in the public eye. Always aware that safety required constant vigilance and the dedication of people committed to providing it. Please subscribe to the channel to appreciate us. Thank you.